change. So was it left?
Welcome to the Subversive Orthodoxy podcast. I'm your host, Travis Mullen, and I'm excited to have you with us. This is a podcast about philosophy and meaning. It is about how we as humans withstand the challenges of our cultures. It is about the general Judeo-Christian revelation of God in the world and how the bloodiest century ever recorded couldn't kill that revelation. It's also about how that revelation, tossed aside as archaic, outdated, and obsolete, may be the very life-giving power we need to resist this distracted techno state we're living in, full of anxiety, depression, and teenage suicide.
It's great entertainment, thrilling entertainment. It's the inside story packed with drama.
Back in 2006 or 2007, I saw a book on the shelves at Barnes & Noble, and it read Subversive Orthodoxy, Outlaws, Revolutionaries, and Other Christians in Disguise. And I just had to have this book. It wasn't the first time. I had been a pastor for about 10 or 15 years, and I had over 500 books probably. My wife was always trying to get me to get rid of books, and I just kept collecting them and collecting them. Over the years, I started to realize that this one book I just kept coming back to. Somehow it challenged me and created some sort of a vastness that most of the books I read did not have. Most of the books I read were some type of specific Christian theology, debating stuff that is debated in seminaries, stuff that normal people would have never heard about. So when I found this book, it involved people like Wendell Berry and Martin Luther King Jr., and Dorothy Day, and I was like, I have to have this book and I have to understand these people, because this is kind of the mind I want to have, where they can understand culture, they can speak to it, they can critique it, they can bless it. They have an understanding that's outside of their own biblical theology. I read some of it back then, and then I just kept coming back to it through the years. It's not super dense in the sense that it's not a huge book. It's more like a reader to get you introduced to these 20 different people in the book. But it is dense, and it's written in a very poetic prose. And I kept getting inspiration from it. The way it inspired me was hearing from people from different vantage points, artists, thinkers, activists, one theologian, and many authors. They had different backgrounds, Russian Orthodox, Baptist, American, all sorts of different other UK and other places. They're coming from different fields and different expertise. The way these authors spoke to my Christian perspective was so deeply profound and true, and it rang out into humanity in general. And that's where I felt the outward motion of this, where I just wanted to share it with somebody. In this way, I believe it to be prophetic and evangelistic. And by evangelistic, I don't mean what I grew up with, a typical understanding of evangelicals and the altar call type of a short message, high pressure sales. I mean, they're sharing and pointing to a macro narrative of God that's good news across space and time. It's a very cosmic good news, a good news that stands up to Nazis and communist fascists. It's prophetic in the sense that it speaks challenge to a culture because of God-implied underpinnings, and evangelistic in the sense that these authors are sharing convictions of hope and a critique of modern and postmodern notions that dehumanize us and enslave us. These are the things I could feel when I would read it, but I didn't know how did these people prophesy these things 100 years ago and 50 years ago. And that's why this book was so profound to me. When I hear McLuhan or Merton describing the culture, it sounds like they're talking about 2025, social media, AI, etc. But these things were not even invented yet. They weren't even on their radar in the slightest. It's like they were seeing the future and could read the times. Jesus once said, "When it is evening and you say, it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, it will be stormy today because the sky is red and threatening. You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times." In Matthew 16, 2-3, he said that. I've always wanted to be able to interpret the signs of the times, but all I have to offer is this subversive orthodoxy, stuff that's been said 50 to 100 years ago, way in advance. And I think it actually is interpreting our time now. honestly, I think it's more relevant now than it was when these writers wrote them. So I had this book. I kept coming back to it. I was revisiting it a few months ago, back in July or August, and I was reading. I think I read Solzhenitsyn chapter, and I was just like, "Man, this book is crazy." And I thought, I looked back at the back cover, Dr. Robert Inchausti. He is teaching at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, English. Huh. I wonder if he's on the website. I reached out to Dr. Robert Larry Inchausti back in August. He goes by Professor or Larry, and I want to tell him how much the Subversive Orthodoxy meant to me. It empowered my worldview and resonated all my inklings about faith and culture. And it challenged my intellect in ways that were both invigorating and deeply challenging. And I knew I had to bring this conversation to others in the form of a podcast. So, with no further ado, I actually have Dr. Robert Larry Inchausti here today, the professor. Hi, Professor.
Hey, Tavis.
Well, it's great to have you here, and I'm so glad you were willing to have this conversation and keep the conversation going from your book.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to be here, and I'm glad that you have the questions.
So, Dr. Larry's formal, or Professor Larry's formal bio here is that he is a professor of English at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and author of numerous books, including Subversive Orthodoxy, the Spitwad Sutras, and Thomas Merton's American Prophecy. He's an authority on Thomas Merton, who is in the book, and a lover of literature by writers who challenge the dominant narratives of our time. From the beats to the mystics, Larry has spent a lifetime studying the voices that refuse to conform. And that's why we're here. So, sorry, I keep saying doctor. When I see PhD, I just think doctor.
Yeah, professor, yeah, don't. I always think of doctors as people that actually heal people physically. So I prefer professor.
Maybe you're a mind doctor.
Yeah.
So the title of the book grabbed me immediately. It's such a provocative couple words together. Mm-hmm. And, we just found out, you shared with me that some authors named Gibson, Green, and Pattison had written a book called Besides the Bible. And this was 100 books that have, should, or will create Christian culture. And I wonder if you wouldn't mind reading that intro to your book on that, because this is they gave Professor Larry a whole shout out in that book.
Well, I will read it if you want me to. I have to go downstairs and get it, so we have to.
Oh, no problem. I have it right here.
Pause. Oh, you have it right there.
Yeah, I have it, and also we could potentially save it for a little later in the conversation too. What was your experience with this book's trajectory through since you wrote it, and then hearing from me? Did it feel like, oh, I don't know if I want to bring up that old book, or did it feel like, yeah, I never really got to play this whole book out as much as I wanted?
Yeah, well, it was the latter. It was like I wanted to go back and revisit Subversive Orthodoxy, because it seemed like it had set me up for my books on Merton, but the backstory to all of that is contained in this Subversive Orthodoxy and in these figures over the last 100 years that were in dialogue with the modern culture, in the sense of Enlightenment culture from 1500 on, but also modern culture in the 20th century and the postmodern movement. And a lot of these figures are people that I found that I didn't even know they were Christian until years later, after I'd been reading them. And then I came across, these letters that they wrote about their Christian faith, and how their work had so been influenced by Christianity, but their secular fans didn't know it, or if they did know it, didn't didn't see it in connection with other thinkers and other prophetic voices of the time. And so it wasn't, for me, it wasn't until I read Solzhenitsyn and he was making such a splash as the prophet who ended communism in the Soviet Union, philosophically and in the West forever, from his point of view.
Yeah.
And I knew that this guy was Christian reading that first volume, because the voice was so familiar in terms of the prophetic voices of other 20th century religious thinkers and mystics, that I wrote an article about him, and then I started finding all of these other prophetic voices. And I said, well, I got to put this together because nobody's really yet sort of connected the dots here, and offered people a way into a orthodoxy which is subversive of the authoritarian and oppressive aspects of modern and postmodern world, but at the same time connecting to deep roots in Western religious history. And so I wanted to make that connection, and I did, but apparently not for many people. Enough people to keep it published. It only was published for about 3 years, and then it went out of publication. But the good news was I got the copyright, so I still am the author of this book. It's not like one of those authors that, like, I think Ray Bradbury sold the rights of Martian Chronicles for $300. And he never got any money after that for all the movies and things that have followed from.
That's crazy. Yeah, so I think it'd be good now to read the intro from those other guys, because they obviously saw in your book what I saw, and they wrote about it perfectly.
Since you have it, well, why don't you read it?
Yeah, I'll read it. It's about two pages. So
okay.
Just listen to how this guy describes the subversive orthodoxy, and this actually will tell you exactly where we're headed with this podcast. And he actually names most, if not all, of the names from the book of where we're headed. So this is kind of the table of contents as well. So this is from Besides the Bible by Dan Gibson, Jordan Green, John Pattison.
John Pattison was the one who wrote the review of my book.
Okay, so this is from John Pattison. Mm-hmm. He says, he opens with a thing about orthodoxy by G.K. Chesterton on Chesterton's book called Orthodoxy. So he says, G.K. Chesterton opens his book Orthodoxy with a parable about a sailor who launched out to discover uncharted lands, but then got off course and bravely rediscovered his own country. Chesterton describing his voyage to faith, says he was that sailor. I am the man who was the utmost daring discovered what had been discovered before. As a burgeoning intellectual, he had tried to be original, tried to stand alone, and only to realize that his feet were firmly planted in Christianity. He tried to be on the cutting edge, 10 minutes in advance of the truth, only to find out he was 2 millennia behind it. He wrote, I did try to found a heresy of my own, and when I had put the last touches to it, I discovered that it was orthodoxy, which is hilarious. Subversive Orthodoxy is Robert Inchausti's book-length essay about 20 poets, philosophers, novelists, historians, critics, religious leaders, and social activists whose work draws from the deep well of the Christian tradition, Chesterton being one of them. Inchausti's subjects are subversive because they are inherently suspicious of worldly power. They're trying to build a new society in the shell of the old, as Peter Morin, the co-founder of the Catholic worker movement, used to say. And they are orthodox because they test new things against first things. In the beginning was the Word, and scrutinize the present in light of the end. This is what Inchausti calls the eschatological perspective on human existence. Inchausti follows a thread of orthodoxy through an impressive roster of artists and thinkers, some we know and on a last name basis, like Blake, Goethe, Kierkegaard, Chesterton, Dostoevsky, Kerouac, Merton, Day, King, others like Nikolai Berdyaev, Boris Pasternak, Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn, Walker Percy, E.F. Schumacher, Wendell Berry, Marshall McLuhan, Northrop Frye, Jacques Ellul, Ivan Illich, and René Girard may be less familiar, but they deserve a wider audience. Together, they comprise nothing less than a lifetime reading plan, and that's what I found too. Subversive Orthodoxy goes far in correcting two persistent misconceptions about Christianity. The first misconception is that Christianity is inherently reactionary, unconsciously wedded to class, race, and gender prejudices, bound by foundational metaphysics, and littered with outworn superstitions. The mass media, whose prevailing bias is for conflict and sensationalism, depicts only the extreme elements of the faith. Meanwhile, a small, what's the word, cadre of revolutionary Christian thinkers has gone about quietly, rigorously examining all thought and culture in the messianic light of the last day. Compare Inchausti's table of contents to our own, and you'll see how thoroughly convinced we are of his argument that the Gospels have served and can still serve as a pivot around which most entrenchant analyses of modern civilization can turn. Wow. There's some brainiacs going here. The second misconception is that orthodoxy is somehow insipid and boring. From Blake's defense of the imagination to Nikolai Berdyaev's critique of the mechanization of the human spirit, from Dorothy Day's struggle to desacralize war to Ivan Illich's lament for the demise of the common space and the contemplative culture, from the Christian anarchism of Jacques Ellul to the radical agrarianism of Wendell Berry. From Dostoevsky, whose novel The Brothers Karamazov has been called the fifth gospel, to Jack Kerouac, who once called himself a strange, solitary, crazy Christian mystic. Inchausti's Outlaws, Revolutionaries, and Other Christians in Disguise confirm that what Chesterton wrote more than a century ago. People have fallen into a foolish habit of speaking of orthodoxy as something heavy, humdrum, and safe. There never was anything so perilous or so exciting as orthodoxy. And a damn about that.
Amen, my brother.
That is a crazy tribute to your book.
Yeah.
So when I talked to you and we thought, this has a lot of relevance for today. I mean, when I read the sections on Solzhenitsyn and McLuhan, especially more recently, I couldn't believe the moral fortitude of Solzhenitsyn and the talk of soul that I feel like our culture has abandoned, along with abandoning like religion in general. They kind of lost the concept of soul and have moved on to things like meditation and mindfulness without any concept of soul, more like just mental health. So hearing Solzhenitsyn say that, from the gulags is pretty incredible, and we'll get way into that.
Yeah.
But then when it comes to McLuhan talking about our culture and media and everything, and just he's literally prophesying about social media is just so insane to me.
Yeah.
Saying that there will be a global village where immediate mass electronic communications will get everyone to know everything about everyone's business in a negative way, knowing way too much about each other.
Yeah.
I just couldn't believe what he was saying when he's saying it in 1967.
Yeah.
So these people have a lot to offer our culture right now. I feel like we're wandering blindly into this technocratic utopia we're walking in.
Well,
it's such a utopia. Everyone's so happy and joyful.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and we want to get into their words, and like you just did. This is from Thomas Merton's Conjectures of a Guilty Bystander, 1966, and it's as you say, is could be talking about 2025. We're living in the greatest revolution in history, a huge spontaneous upheaval of the entire human race. Not the revolution planned and carried out by any particular party, race, or nation, but a deep elemental boiling over of all the inner contradictions that have ever been in man. A revelation of the chaotic forces inside everybody. This is not something we have chosen, nor is it something we're free to avoid. The revolution is a profound spiritual crisis of the whole world, manifested largely in desperation, cynicism, violence, conflict, self-contradiction, ambivalence, fear and hope, doubt and belief, creation and destructiveness, progress and regression, obsessive attachments to images, idols, slogans, programs, and distractions that only dull the general anguish for a moment until it bursts out everywhere in a still more acute and terrifying form. We don't know if we are building a fabulously wonderful world or destroying all that we have ever had, all that we have ever achieved. All the inner force of humanity is boiling and bursting out, the good together with the evil, the good poisoned by evil and fighting it, the evil pretending to be good and revealing itself in the most dreadful crimes, justified and rationalized by the purest and most innocent intentions. There you got it, man. That's the
That's Merton
that's
nailing the whole thing.
nailing it. but just as a commentary on the present, I'm always, one of the things I think made Subversive Orthodoxy kind of a secret, or a cult following of 25 people, or whatever, however many would contact me about the book, is that people don't read much anymore in the way that you have to put everything aside and concentrate to get the deeper meaning of Solzhenitsyn. I mean, Solzhenitsyn, 3 volumes, right?
3 large volumes.
3 large volumes. I mean, you have to like be dedicated for a month or two to read that.
Yeah.
But and not every paragraph is going to be really exciting or startling with an aphorism or something. But if you hang in there, you're climbing a mountain and you get to a point where there's these vistas where you turn around and you see the last 50 years in depth in 3D cinemascope vision. And this guy is telling you about, how he got there. And it'll hit you, kind of like all at once, and you'll see it all at once. And you don't forget it. It alters your view of the world. You don't have to memorize lines. Just the name itself evokes in me those 2 months that I dedicated to reading Solzhenitsyn, and realizing that I would say every review I had read of it was read by somebody who hadn't read the book, right? Because you can only say these glib one-liners if you hadn't been with the guy in his arrest, in his torture, in his interrogations, in his marching on the tundra, trying to write without a pencil.
Yeah.
These are memorized. But the way you write without a pencil is you memorize your lines while you're marching on the tundra, and you make every fifth line rhyme. So if the 5th line doesn't rhyme, you forgot a line. So now you have to continue marching to find that line that you dropped. And then once you pick it up again, then you're allowed to go on to the next. And he did this for months. And so when he finally gets access to like a pencil, he has to bury it in his cell because it's contraband material. And he can't let anybody see that he has a pencil. And then when he finally gets a piece of paper 5 months later, he has to cut it in little strips and roll it in little rolls and bury the rolls in his cell. And so then when he decides to write, he doesn't want to waste the paper. So he develops a script that contains no vowels. So he can just write with consonants that will bring back to him these precious descriptions and points he wants to preserve, never knowing if he'll ever be able to dig them up from his cell and be able to send them in letters or however he's going to get them out. That's still up to question. And even if he got them out, they would never be published in the Soviet Union because the censors would never allow any stories about the Gulag because they claimed they didn't exist. So when he finally gets out, I know we're getting ahead of the story, but
you always get ahead on when we talk about Solzhenitsyn.
when he gets out, he decides that now he's going to write. He's going to be able to write, and when they arrested him, they asked him what his occupation was, and he had been an officer in the Russian army in World War II. He was sent from the front in World War II to the Gulag. So he went from fighting the Nazis to being the victim of his own Soviet government.
Yeah.
And when he wrote that his profession was atomic scientist. And he wasn't an atomic scientist, but he thought that they would be less likely to kill an atomic scientist. Mm-hmm. So if they thought he was an atomic scientist, they might keep him around longer than what they did with some of the other guys. So he finally gets out, and they give him a job teaching physics at a Siberian high school and junior and middle school. So he's teaching middle school physics in Siberia in the day. And then in the night, he's writing the Gulag one page at a time and burying it in tin cans in his backyard. And he had 5 different novels going at the same time, and there were 5 different tin cans. And then he sent a letter to, I think it was Tolstoy's great cousin or aunt, with a map of his backyard, and say, if you ever hear that I died, this is the location of the lost literature of the Russian people. Wow. And you can come here, and this is where they're at. And he had, a little chart of his backyard. And luckily, he was able to get out, and the rest is history. But while he was there working on his paper, there was the Gulag on the radio. There was an interview with a contemporary Soviet bestseller author, and they were asking him how he writes his Soviet realist mysteries. And he was saying, well, I try to have 3 different color pens, and I listen to music and stuff. And he was thinking, this guy, he has every thing to help him write, but nothing to say. Yeah. And I have everything to say, but no means of saying it.
Yeah, that's so cool.
And so I just got to, remember that other writers went through more, and then I just have to be thankful that I was given a story to tell, and that my story will someday, he had to have the faith, will bring down the Soviet regime and the lie that is dialectical materialism won't be able to coexist with my story.
Yeah.
And so that's what almost all these writers are similar in that way.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you. You started with Solzhenitsyn. That's how you got the idea, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so then tell us how did it branch out from there into the other writers? Like, obviously, don't tell your whole Merton backstory yet. We'll include that in another day, because I do want to hear your personal story relates to Merton, and that will be like an intro to Merton.
Yeah.
So
No, well, this will be.
How
This will
did you
be.
branch out to these other authors?
Well,
Had you already read them, or were you kind of like hunting them down at this point?
well, I'd read some of the people that he referred to, and I mean, I knew some people that he referred to in his book, his literary memoir. Um, I had already read, so that
Like
was
Dostoevsky, obviously, and
like
Tolstoy.
Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and Chekhov, I taught at the university. Um, but then he also mentioned Pasternak as having a big influence on him. And at that time, I didn't know much about Pasternak, so I got Yevashenko's anthology of Silver Age, well, actually, dissident Russian writers from the Silver Age to the present, and there was a long section in there on Pasternak and his relationship to the Anna Akhmatova and Marina Tesvateva and Mayakovsky, who were these great sort of revolutionary Russian writers before the Russian Revolution, were dissidents against the Tsar and then found themselves in opposition to the Bolsheviks, and ultimately, many of them thrown in jail by Stalin for violating his authoritarian.
So it kind of branched out into Russian mostly at first, and then you
Yeah,
started
yeah, just
adding
in Russian
others.
dissidents at first, and then a lot of them ended up in France after World War One, and were part of the uh, existential movement after World War Two, having survived a second bout with Nazi and uh, war-torn terrorist countries that a lot of them ended up in.
Yeah.
And so there's like two generations of just amazing Russian poetry. But Pasternak, we could talk a little bit about Pasternak because he's a great example. Um, he um, he was a poet, famous Russian poet, lyricist. He was considered the sort of the antithesis to Mayakovsky. Mayakovsky was the public orator of the Russian Revolution, and Pasternak was the uh, interior, um, uh, reflective soul of the people that survived the Russian Revolution. Maybe put it that way. Uh, and so uh, they they were kind of different politically, although they really admired one another's courage to stand up against the regime before the revolution, and then also to not give their integrity over to the Stalinist takeover. So they were grudgingly sort of frenemies, I guess you would call them today.
Yeah.
And I knew about Mayakovsky because he's sort of famous, but I hadn't known that Pasternak was a poet because the only thing I knew about him was that he had written Dr. Zhivago. And Dr. Zhivago had just been made into a big motion picture in the 50s. And also, Pasternak won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1958. And then um, the Soviets refused to let him receive it because they said it was a trick by the Swedish committee to honor an anti-Soviet writer within his own country, and that he really wasn't that great.
Yeah.
and they wanted him to renounce his own writing and make apologies for having been so misunderstood by the West and blah blah blah. And so
And he was still living in Russia, right?
and he was still living in Russia. And Solzhenitsyn's heart was broken because he thought Pasternak was going to go and get the award and blast the regime and explain what that novel was all about. But he died a year later of a heart attack.
Pasternak did.
Yeah, but who knows why he died a year later exactly, right? But a lot of it had to do with the mental pressure on him to, he's one of the Russia's greatest modern writers, and here he's being hounded to renounce everything he ever did. And the way he survived the Stalin years was he translated all the great Western literature into Russian. So he translated Shakespeare and Goethe and the English poets all into Russian. And so he was part of the thaw that took place when Khrushchev took over, and after Stalin died. For a moment there was kind of like glasnost, an opening of Russian culture to the world that lasted for a while.
Yeah.
And he would have been, a key player, especially with Dr. Zhivago being a bestseller in the West and being made into a movie.
Yeah.
But the problem was the movie is not an accurate portrayal of the book, because the book is a story about a contemplative who and very written in very symbolic, poetic language, with Laura, a kind of symbol of the natural goodness of the Russian people.
Actually, I'll read the thing you said about it, that
Yes.
they were afraid of it turning into a movie.
Yeah.
When Pasternak won the Nobel Prize in 1958, the Soviets saw the award as a propaganda attempt by the West to elevate a second-rate anti-Soviet novelist in front of ranks of world literature, and so forbade him from accepting the prize. Soviet critics blasted Zhivago as a species of failed socialist realism, misreading its form, undervaluing its lyricism, and totally ignoring its symbolic character. While many Western readers misappropriated the work as an anti-communist tract, oversimplifying its complex message and undervaluing its artistic integrity, and missing its ascetic spirituality. There was a part about the novel also terribly misrepresented by David Lean's movie, which captures all its images and none of its ideas.
Yeah, that's so true. You would go a far mile to find many ideas in that book. Other than in the very end, there's a weird thing in the movie where they show the one of the sons of one of the characters had become a liberal or a general in the Russian army after Stalin had died, and looking for a representation of a humanist perspective on the world. But it's like he has three lines, and nobody, you don't really know who he is in the movie, and it's so overshadowed by the love story between Dr. Zhivago and Laura that it just becomes a very good romantic epic, but not the prophetic, contemplative story that Pasternak told. One of the things he would say about the book, the only positive kind of thing he said about his own book was, there are people like Zhivago in Russia. And by that, he was trying to say, there are Christian contemplatives who see through the lies of history, like Zhivago, like me. Right?
Yeah.
But he couldn't say that. And Solzhenitsyn was so disappointed in him, because he thought, this is going to open the door to all my books. I have 6 novels buried in the backyard that expose all these things in detail, with actual historical events, and and then when he said, "Well, I guess I'm going to have to win the Nobel Prize so that people will take me seriously. Otherwise, they'll think one more time that this is a this is an anti-Soviet trick or something."
Yeah.
And so,
Just a second. I want to read
yeah,
to give our readers, our listeners, a little bit of your intro to Pasternak. Something Thomas Merton said about him is a quote on Pasternak. He said, "Pasternak's Christianity is something very simple, very rudimentary, deeply sincere, utterly personal, and yet, for all its questionable expressions, obviously impregnated with the true spirit of the Gospels and the liturgy." Thomas Merton. And then
you could say that about a lot of almost all these characters in this book.
in
Yeah.
this other paragraph, I put a bunch of underlines and a wow, so I got to read that. Boris Pasternak once described himself as an atheist who had lost his faith in atheism. And I just feel like that's relevant to our culture in general, because people
Yes.
might find themselves as atheists, and they might find themselves as agnostic. And here's an incredible mind dealing with the Russian Revolution who lost his faith in atheism.
Yes.
And he was born Jewish. So born Jewish, he was brought up by his nanny in the Russian Orthodox faith. But as a young man, he became a skeptic and supported the October Revolution as Russia's best chance to turn the tables on history and right the wrongs of its tyrannical past. When the revolution turned sour and its idealism was betrayed, Pasternak lost his faith in faithlessness and became an internal emigre, living in quiet protest.
Internal immigrant. He felt like he was a foreigner in his own country.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Living in quiet protest against the new totalitarian state, quietly translating Hamlet and Faust, and along with Anna Akhmatova and Marina Tsaveva,
Testevia. Yeah.
and Mandelstam, launching a radical defense of the poetic imagination through clandestine readings and private publications that would reverberate throughout the world as one of the greatest defenses of conscience in all of literary history. In this last line, during this time of persecution, he tells us he, quote, came to understand the Bible not so much as a book with a hard and fast text as the notebook of humanity and a key to everything that is eternal.
Yeah.
So that
that's Pasternak, and you wouldn't necessarily get that from Dr. Zhivago. Yeah, as beautiful as those images were of the film, you need the ideas to go with it to let you know what you're seeing. You're not just seeing a vacation in Vermont or something. It's
yeah. I haven't seen it yet, so I was gonna explore him a little more before I read it. I mean, before I see it.
Yeah, it's not the book that the book is well, as is always the case. The book is better than the movie, because it's a deep reflection through the eyes of Dr. Zhivago, who is sort of a stand-in for Pasternak himself, becoming losing faith in his atheism.
That's pretty cool.
And a story of our times. How long is it going to take for people to realize how credulous you have to be to believe in atheism as a dogma. A man's best friend is his. Karl Rahner used to say, "A man's best friend is his dogma," and the dogma of atheism, is this? It isn't skeptical enough. If it were only more true to its own skepticism, then there'd be constant dialogues between different forms of faith and belief and contemplation, which is what one would expect the postmodern culture to be, but it largely isn't.
Yeah, it's not. I have a little theory. This is just some fresh Travis Mullen thought here.
Yeah.
But I have my own theory working theory that people believe what they want to believe.
Uh-huh.
That's my theory.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty
And
succinct and true, I'm sure.
I've noticed it on Joe Rogan's podcast where he will talk to, people that have some kind of a wacky idea about health or about politics or about aliens, and
Uh-huh.
he's totally into it.
Uh-huh.
And then he has a Christian on there telling him about Jesus, and he's super skeptical.
Yeah. Yeah.
He has this incredible, he becomes this incredible scientist at that point.
Yeah.
But when it's something he wants to believe in, it's incredibly open. So I've noticed that, and I like hearing his thought process. But I did notice that there was one guy in particular who was like a physicist,
Mhm.
a Christian, who was like, no, a biologist. I think it was microbiology is what led him to faith, and it was just too hard. Joe Rogan just had, but what about? But what about? He had
Yeah.
he had
Yeah.
15 layers of buts,
Yeah.
and when it comes to other subjects, there's just no buts, or maybe one but. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of this resistance. And I'm not, he might even be open to it. I don't know, but his resistance is evident. Like it's very resistant to certain things. And it reminded me of your quote where the atheist isn't applying his own skepticism to himself or to his own dogma.
Well, that's the other thing that impressed me by these figures that I uncovered was that
Oh yeah.
their self-criticism is a big part of what they're about. Like Solzhenitsyn, since we're talking about him, he has second thoughts about how he handled his arrest. And he says it right up front. Why didn't I protest my arrest? Well, it wouldn't have done any good. And I think there was a part of me that knew that I was waiting until I really understood how to take down this regime before I started popping off in public. And
Yeah.
that would require me to become the writer I want to be before I get my own podcast. But what happens is, you get podcasts now on Solzhenitsyn, or you get podcasts on, my 5 favorite novels or my 20 favorite novels, and they're reduced to 5 sentences. And
Yeah.
and you can tell if you've read any of those books that either they didn't read the book or they didn't understand the book, because most really great literature, books, or ideas, the writers understand the limitations of it, and they
Yeah.
and they give you the limits of their own thought, and it's so
It's
humbling.
like intellectually humble,
Yeah,
intellectual humility.
intellectual humility, and that's what we call gravitas, right?
Yeah.
Uh, that they give you the truth that they found, and then they sort of say, but that came from the life I lived, and that came from these ideas, and that came from here, and now it's your turn. You go there and you read them and you spend the time. It's not just being glib and having answers. One thing, podcast and talk radio and social talk shows and stuff. Back in the day when uh, Mother Teresa won I think Mother Teresa won the Nobel Peace Prize. I think that's true. And she was on a Canadian television show with the biologist that had won the Nobel Prize in medicine that year. And the talk show host was trying to stir controversy, you know. And so he said, well, this is very interesting. We have a doctor here who's working on cell research that might someday result in eternal life for human beings. And we have a Catholic a social worker who believes in eternal life. What do they have to say to one another? And so he asks Mother Teresa, what she thinks about what would it be if the doctor was able to create actual material eternal life. And Mother Teresa says, I don't know about that, but I do know I believe in love and compassion, and I would prefer that to eternal physical life.
That's
And
cool.
the doctor said after the show that was the closest he ever came to being converted to Christianity.
She subverted his question like Jesus does.
Yeah, it's like, well, if you have eternal life and you don't have love and compassion, what do you have? You have eternal damnation is what you have. Eternity is that's not even a Christian concept of eternity.
Um,
So put
it's
your values ahead of your technological miracles. You have
That's
to.
a funny concept. Given I just this week was writing I was trying to write a short story about a technological future scenario where people are resurrected by
Mhm.
biotech.
Uh-huh.
They're kind of kept alive in a bunch of chips and wires and things
Yeah.
in their body, and they can't die anymore.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
they're in like this Project Resurrection eternal state, and they don't like it. Like this guy, the main character's wife was resurrected, and he didn't even want her to be because now she's stuck working for the state,
Yeah. Right.
technocratic state.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like now it's kind of out of that Revelation and a Bob Dylan line that like they want to die and they can't even die now.
Yeah.
Death is a relief to that,
Yeah.
which that is back to these Russian characters where they
Yeah.
had to survive the gulags and the Jews in the Nazi camps. It's like how, I mean, this whole concept is answering the question, like, how did they survive that without just wanting to die and
Mhm.
either kill themselves or, death by cop? Because
Yeah. Yeah.
they could have
Yeah.
easily done that with a guard.
Yeah.
But the fortitude slash some type of hope
Hmm.
of living beyond that was keeping them going. And that's an incredible um, dive into the human psyche that we'll be exploring more with these characters.
Well, yes, definitely. And Dostoevsky is the guy we're going to go for that. One of the guys who anticipated a lot of that 19th century, and he spent time in a prison camp in Siberia, but his was a 19th century prison camp. So you can imagine it was probably even more primitive than the one that's. I don't know how
Yeah.
you could be in a prison camp more primitive than the one Solzhenitsyn was in, but I can imagine Dostoevsky was pretty close to that.
Yeah. So yeah, and another thing about that is that which we didn't get to do it because we weren't particularly going to focus on Solzhenitsyn and
Yeah,
Pasternak today, but
yeah,
the Russian story to me is like a very unknown story to most Americans that I've talked to. Like everybody's like gulags, I might have heard of that, and then Solzhenitsyn, oh yeah, I think I've heard of him, but that's about it. It's like, wow, now that I've heard this story, I can't believe it's not front of mind for many people because
well, yeah. I can't believe it hasn't been a movie. I mean,
I know
he wrote one short story that was popular in the West for a while. A Day in the
Ivan
Life.
Denisovich. Yeah.
Yeah,
They
and
made a
it's
movie out of that.
yeah, they made a movie, and that was just one day in a prison camp. Uh, and how this guy survives, and it's actually a good day for the guy, but it's from any objective point of view, it was a horrendous day. Um, but taken out of context of the gulag, of the whole picture that he presented, or an understanding of history, or understanding of the atrocities and the gulags that are uh, around today, um, it it doesn't connect. For some reason, people don't connect it with.
Well, it's the scope. The scope hasn't been given to the
Yeah,
public. The public
yeah,
has not seen what this was yet. I don't feel like they have
yeah,
in a popular culture way.
yeah,
I don't think the gulags has made it to popular culture
yeah. Or
because the Holocaust has because there's so many movies about it. But meanwhile, there's, while there's 11 million dying in Nazi camps, there's another 30 million dying in gulags and death marches and such, and just being shot and being arrested for very minimal things. And it's just a astonishing story. I mean, it's absolutely incredible story. And and then to hear the Pasternak to the Solzhenitsyn handoff, and how we'll get into that more. But the whole the listeners, you have to look forward to the handoff between Pasternak and Solzhenitsyn, how mad he was. Professor alluded to it, but Solzhenitsyn really wanted him to blow the top off the regime of the communists, and he didn't do it. He stayed quiet, kind of, and then Solzhenitsyn did it. But then Professor's also going to present a whole nother little anthology of dissident poets during that time too, who had to hide their poetry in their minds. And that's going to be an incredible tale as well.
A lot of the Russian poets composed, and I think this might be a tribute to the dissidents. They didn't do rough drafts. They composed in their heads, and then when the poem was done, they wrote it down. A lot of them were like that.
So I'm going to bring this in for a landing for this first episode, but we're really glad to have you guys here with us, and I hope this is intriguing to you, and we find our audience of people who have philosophy, theology, culture, politics, ethics, all in mind, and history as well. This kind of touches on all that and synergizes it. Something that fascinates me about these writers and these people is that as the culture was going away from faith, they were going towards it. Some of them had radical conversions during the 1900s, while the culture was drifting into a secularism, and a lot of them moving into a Catholicism and even deeper expressions of Orthodoxy. There's something here for all of you, whether you're a skeptic or a believer or somewhere in between with some deconstruction journey. We're going to be exploring what this means, a life of deep meaning in a world that feels increasingly fragmented and dealing with nihilism. We hope you'll join us on this ongoing conversation. Until then, thank you for listening to the Subversive Orthodoxy podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and share this with anyone who might find these conversations meaningful. Spiritually, I want to jump off a cliff without a parachute, like I'm high on cannabis, and skip through fields naked, like I wonder if I could drift, or if I could drift through it, dancing through moonlight under nighttime skies. This has been the Subversive Orthodoxy podcast with Travis Mullins and Professor Inchausti. Say hi to human beings with a smile unseen, grabbing wildflowers as I slide down hills, after a rain, after some pain, after the same, I'm to blame. Love in my veins, through syringes untamed, like dosage doesn't matter, inject these veins. People got problems.